Okay, Kelly.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kelly Harris, and I am the new executive director here at the John Germain Memorial Library. And I would like to welcome you all to our 14th annual African American Read-In, sponsored by Canio's Cultural Cafe, the Eastville Historical Society, and the John Germain Memorial Library. The African American Read-In is a national program which was established in 1990 by the Black Caucus of the National Council of Teachers of English. Its goal was to make literacy a significant part of Black History Month. The initiative has reached more than 6 million participants around the world. I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight and for participating. I'd like to thank Catherine from Canio's, Georgette from Eastville, my colleague Wanda from John Germain, and our featured readers, Jennifer Morgan and Noel Hankin, for joining us this evening as well. So without further ado, here we are.
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Georgette Rickie. I'm the Executive Director of Eastville Community Historical Society. And today we have one of our featured readers. And tonight I want to introduce to you Jennifer Morgan, who is a local author and our featured reader. She is the author of Reckoning with Slavery, Gender, Kinship, and Capitalism in the Early Black Atlantic. Also, Laboring Women, Gender, and Reproduction in the Making of the New World Slavery. So I want to now give it over to her to share with us from either one of her own books or her favorite author. Jennifer, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Georgette, and thank you all for being here tonight. And I'm gonna read something from my own work, but it comes from a wonderful volume called 400 Souls, a community history of African America from 1619 to 2019. And it was edited by Ibram Kendi and Keisha Blaine. And there are 70 of us who each wrote really small pieces on African American history. So I'm going to read the little piece that I wrote that's called Elizabeth Key. And it takes place from 1660 to 1665. And I should just start by saying that in 1662 in Virginia, there was a law passed that said that the condition of children born to African women would follow the status of their mothers, not their fathers. It's a really important law that defines what racial slavery is going to mean in all of the Americas. So that's the starting point. As a child, Elizabeth Key found herself misidentified, called outside her name. At some point in the late 1620s, a free white Englishman and member of the Virginia House of Burgesses named Thomas Key had impregnated Elizabeth's enslaved African-born mother. What her mother, who was never actually named, and who was only called woman slave in the records, hoped or believed about her daughter's future is utterly lost. What is clear is that Thomas Key's death threw her future, Elizabeth's future, into some confusion. Although she had been placed in an indenture, not enslaved, as a child, after his death, she was sold to another Virginia landowner. Now, selling the remaining terms of an indenture was not uncommon, but because she was the daughter of an African woman, her race made her vulnerable to abuses that an English woman would have been protected from. Although they had embraced the system of African slavery elsewhere in the Atlantic, in Virginia, the English were still relying mostly on indentured servants, the vast majority of whom were English themselves. In the 1650s, there were fewer than 300 Africans in the colony, or about 1% of the population of English settlers. And yet Elizabeth understood that she was in danger and that her color could dictate her status. Now, her status as Thomas Key's daughter was never a secret. It was widely known that this young woman's father was a free Englishman. We learned from a witness at the trial that would ensue that out of ignorance or spite, Thomas Key's other child, John, had called Elizabeth Black Bess. The overseer's wife checked him and said, "Sir, you must call her sister, for she is your sister." In other words, Elizabeth was widely acknowledged to be Thomas Key's daughter. Now, whether or not the overseer's wife was meant to take John down a peg, it was recognition of Elizabeth's lineage. But her relative freedom, pinned as it was to the paternity, to a transgressive paternity, was not sufficient. So, in order to protect herself and her son in 1655 at the age of 25, Elizabeth Key petitioned in the court for her freedom, and she became the first woman of African descent to do so in the North American English colonies. While we know very little about her, we can be confident that she had a precise understanding of the dangers that surrounded her as a result of the consequences of race and sex in colonial Virginia. She had, at this time, been transferred to a third Englishman. Remember, she was never enslaved. She was put into an indenture. But by then, a third man claimed to own her and listed her among her Negroes rather than his servants. She had been, at that time, held for at least 10 years longer than the terms of her 1636 indenture. Her freedom was granted, it was then overturned, and finally, when she brought her case to the General Assembly, it was conferred. At that point, she and her common law husband posted their intention to marry, and she and her descendants remained legally free well into the 18th century. But importantly, less than 6 years later, the Virginia Assembly revisited this case, perhaps understanding that granting freedom to the children of women raped by free property owning Englishmen would fundamentally undermine the system of slavery that they relied on. And so it was at this moment in 1662 that they decreed that the condition of a child born to an African woman, no matter who the father was, would follow that woman into slavery. This was a piece of legislation that encapsulated the early understanding of racial slavery, the understanding that it was a category of labor that only African people. Wanda?
You know, I'm sorry. I'm just going to ask.
Went out on me.
The video, you froze for that very last few sentences, and so I just thought maybe you could reread that if that would, because it's very powerful. Would that be okay? No,
that would be totally okay. From where?
Just maybe the last paragraph. Is that?
Okay. So her freedom was conferred in 1656, and once she was declared free, she and her common law husband, William Grinstead, publicly announced their intention to marry, and she and her descendants remained legally free well into the 18th century. Less than 6 years later, however, the Virginia Assembly revisited the case, perhaps understanding that granting freedom to the children of women raped by free property owning Englishmen would fundamentally undermine the labor system, the system of slavery that they were going to rely upon. And so it was at that moment in 1662 that they decreed that the condition of a child born to an African woman, no matter who the father was, would follow that woman into slavery. This was a piece of legislation that encapsulated the early understanding of racial slavery, that to be Black was to have a condition, a category of labor imposed upon you that African people, only African people, and their descendants would always inherit.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. We really appreciate it. Our next reader, if she's ready, the first person on my list is Christine Kendall. She's an author who's also local, and she just contacted us today. Thank you for joining us, Christine.
Thank you. I'm going to read a very brief piece of flash fiction entitled Peepers. My 5-year-old son finds a way to climb up the outside wall of our bungalow so he can peek into the kitchen. His short brown fingers clutch the window frame as his curly hair rises up into the space above the sill. When finally his eyes appear behind the screen, there's laughter in them, but I yell at him to get down. Right now, I say. He ignores me and swivels his head from left to right, taking in the full measure of our small place. Are you deaf? I shout, an unfamiliar heat rising up into my face. I scratch at my 3-day-old beard, but I know that's not the cause of my discomfort. My shouting draws Maya into our usually quiet little kitchen. Her wide eyes gently search my face, but her back stiffens when she sees our boy in the window. How long has it been? Over 4 years since I cut through our backyard on my way home from work and found a man pressed up against that same wall peeking into our house. We didn't have kitchen curtains then, and he could easily see Maya seated at the old wooden table feeding our newborn. My son's lips were clasped around the dark nipple of her caramel breast that protruded from her unbuttoned white blouse. You're wrong, man. Screaming, I picked up a stick and ran toward the red-faced thug, but he heard me coming and took off down my neighbor's driveway. Maya cried when I told her what happened. She couldn't bear the thought that the man may have watched her before. For me, the hardest part was him getting away. I'd wanted to cut loose on him, pound his head against the aluminum siding, draw some blood. But that's not what happened. The man tore down the driveway, turning over 2 empty trash cans as he went. I took the first one like an Olympic hurdler, but got all tangled up in the second one, slamming down hard on the asphalt. I struggled to my feet and limped to the curb, but the guy had already disappeared down the street. Now, our son's questioning eyes dart back and forth between his mother and me. He's kneeling on a chair, Maya says, gesturing at our boy. He won't get hurt. My son giggles and grins, but all I want to do is close the curtains. Maya pats my arm before stepping out into the backyard and sitting on the seat of the garden chair with our only child, their bodies fitting together as if they were made that way. They peer through the screen and make goo-goo eyes at me, at our little house and everything in it. My jaw slackens as I lean against the wall. I raise the window screen and cup each of their pointy little chins in one of my big hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next reader for the evening is Gloria Brown. Let's see, Gloria,
You're still muted, Gloria.
Unmuting? Okay. Looks like we might have a little trouble unmuting. Let's see. We can move on to the next reader and come back to Gloria if that's okay. The next reader I have is Eva Ayakono. Eva, if you don't mind unmuting.
Yes, is it working? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm really happy to participate in this important event, and thank you to all the organizers. Tonight, I'm reading a couple pages from a book it's a memoir by Jasmine Ward called Men We Reaped. And if you're not aware of who she is, this author, she's a 2-time National Book Award winner for fiction. And she's from Delisle, Mississippi. We who still live do what we must. Life is a hurricane, and we board up to save what we can and bow low to the earth, to crouch in that small space above the dirt where the wind will not reach. We honor anniversaries of deaths by cleaning graves and sitting next to them before fires, sharing food with those who will not eat again. We raise children and tell them other things about who they can be and what they are worth. To us, everything. We love each other fiercely while we live and after we die. We survive. We are savages. When I was 12 years old, I looked in the mirror and I saw what I perceived to be my faults and my mother's faults. These coalesced into a dark mark that I would carry through my life, a loathing of what I saw, which came from others' hatred of me. And all this fostered a hatred of myself. I thought being unwanted and abandoned and persecuted was the legacy of the poor Southern Black woman. But as an adult, I see my mother's legacy anew. I see how all the burdens she bore, the burdens of her history and identity and our country's history and identity, enabled her to manifest her greatest gifts. My mother had the courage to look at 4 hungry children and find a way to fill them. My mother had the strength to work her body to its breaking point to provide for herself and her children. My mother had the resilience to cobble together a family from the broken bits of another. And my mother's example teaches me other things. This is how a transplanted people survived a Holocaust and slavery. This is how Black people in the South organized to vote under the shadow of terrorism and the noose. This is how human beings sleep and wake and fight and survive. In the end, this is how a mother teaches her daughter to have courage, to have strength, to be resilient, to open her eyes to what is, and to make something of it. As the eldest daughter of an eldest daughter, and having just born a daughter, I hope to teach my child these lessons, to pass on my mother's gifts. Without my mother's legacy, I would never have been able to look at this history of loss, this future where I will surely lose more, and write the narrative that remembers, write the narrative that says, hello, we are here, listen. It is not easy, I continue. Sometimes I am tireless, and sometimes I am weary. And when I am weary, I imagine this. After the moment I die, I will find myself standing on the side of a long, pitted asphalt road, flanked on both sides by murmuring pine trees under a hot, high sun in a blue sky. In the distance, I will hear a rumbling, thumping, a bass beat. A dull blue 85 Cutlass will cut the horizon, come growling down the road before stopping in front of me. It will stop so quickly the gravel will crunch, and then my brother will swing the passenger door wide with one long tattooed arm and other on the wheel. He will look at me with his large, dark, liquid eyes, his face soft. He will know that I have been waiting. He will say, come take a ride with me. I will, brother, I'm here.
Thank you so much. That was lovely.
You're welcome.
I think that Gloria is ready.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Can
Thank
you hear
you.
me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Next year will be the 30th anniversary of tennis player Arthur Ashe's passing. He was a friend of mine, and I have spent my downtime, my COVID time, going back and rereading some of my favorite novels and biographies and so forth. So today I am reading from Days of Grace. It was Arthur's last book, and the small piece I'm reading is called The Burden of Race. I had spent more than an hour talking in my office at home with a reporter from People magazine. Her editor had sent her to do a story about me and how I was coping with AIDS. The reporter's questions had been probing and yet respectful of my right to privacy. Now our interview was over. I was escorting her to the door. As she slipped on her coat, she fell silent. I could see that she was groping for the right words to express her sympathy for me before she left. Mr. Ashe, I guess this must be the heaviest burden you've ever had to bear, isn't it? She asked finally. I thought for a moment, but only a moment. No, it isn't. It's a burden, all right, but AIDS isn't the heaviest burden I've had to bear. Is there something worse? Your heart attack? I didn't want to detain her, but I left the door closed with both of us still inside. You're not going to believe this, I said to her, but being Black is the greatest burden I've had to bear. You can't mean that. No question about it. Race has always been my biggest burden. Having to live as a minority in America, even now it continues to feel like an extra weight tied around me. I can still recall the surprise and perhaps even the hurt on her face. I may even have surprised myself because I simply had never thought of comparing the two conditions before. However, I stand by my remark. Race is for me a more onerous burden than AIDS. My disease is the result of biological factors over which we thus far have had no control. Racism, however, is entirely made by people, and therefore it hurts and inconveniences infinitely more. Since our interview skillfully presented appeared in People in June 1992, many people have commented on my remark. A radio station in Chicago, aimed primarily at Blacks, conducted a lively debate on its merits on the air. Most African Americans have little trouble understanding and accepting my statement, but other people have been baffled by it. Even Donald Dell, my close friend of more than 30 years, was puzzled. So puzzled that he telephoned me in the middle of the night from Hamburg, Germany, to ask if I had been misquoted. No, I told him, I had been quoted correctly. Some people have asked me flatly, what could you, Arthur Ashe, possibly have to complain about? Do you want more money or fame than you already have? Isn't AIDS inevitably fatal? What can be worse than death? I do not want to be misunderstood. I do not mean to appear fatalistic, self-pitying, cynical, or maudlin. Proud to be an American, I am also proud to be an African American. I delight in the accomplishments of fellow citizens of my color. When one considers the odds against which we have labored, we have achieved much. I believe in life, hope, and love. I turn my back on death, and I must face my end in all its finality. A shadow fell across me recently on one of the brightest days. Literally and metaphorically, it was a bright day, one of the brightest of my life. On August 30th, 1992, the day before the US Open, the US Tennis Association and I together hosted an afternoon of tennis at the National Tennis Center in Flushing Meadows, New York. The event was a benefit for the Arthur Ashe Foundation for the defeat of AIDS. Before the start, I was nervous. Would the invited guests, i.e. McEnroe, Graf, Navratilova, et al., show up? Would they cooperate with us or be difficult to manage? With CBS televising the event live and Aetna having provided the airtime, a profit was ensured. What could mar such a day? The shadow of race and my sensitivity, or perhaps hypersensitivity, to its nuances. Sharing the main stadium box with Jean, Camera, and me at my invitation were Stan Smith, his wife Marjorie, and their daughter Austin. The two little girls were happy to see one another, and Austin brought twin dolls, one for herself, one for Camera. A thoughtful gesture on Austin's part and on her parents' part too. Then I noticed that Camera was playing with her doll above the railing of the box, in full view of the attentive network television cameras. The doll was the problem, or rather, the fact that the doll was conspicuously blonde. Camera owns dolls of all colors, nationalities, and ethnic varieties, but she was now on national television playing with a blonde doll. Suddenly, I heard voices in my head, the voices of irate listeners to a call-in show on some Black format radio station. I imagined insistent, clamorous callers attacking Camera, Jean, and me. Quote, "Can you believe the doll Arthur Ashe's daughter was holding up at the AIDS benefit? Wasn't that a shame? Is that brother sick or what? Somebody ought to teach that poor child about her true Black self. What kind of role model is Arthur Ashe if he allows his daughter to be whitewashed in that way? Doesn't the brother understand that he is corrupting his child's mind with notions about the propriety of the superiority of the white woman? I tell you, I thought we were long past that. The voices became harder in my head. Jean, I whispered, we have to do something. About what? She whispered back, that doll. We have to get Camera to put the doll down. Jean takes one look at Camera and the doll, and she understands immediately. Quietly, cleverly, she makes the dolls disappear. Neither Camera nor Austin is aware of anything unusual happening. Gosh, Arthur, I never thought about that, said Margie when I explained to her what happened. You don't have to think about it, I explained, but it happens to us in similar situations all the time. Deeply embarrassed now, I am ashamed at what I have done. I have made Camera adjust her behavior merely because of the likelihood that some people in the African American community would react to her innocence foolishly and perhaps even maliciously. This incident almost ruined the day for me. That night, when Jean and I talked about the excitement of the afternoon and the money that would go to AIDS research and education because of the event, we nevertheless ended up talking mostly about the incident of the dolls. Once again, the shadow of race had fallen on me. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. Our next reader is Heidi Rae.
Hi, I'm really happy to be part of this, and I'm so glad it exists. And thank everybody who's made it happen. I'm going to be reading a poem by Maya Angelou called "A Conceit." Give me your hand. Make room for me to lead and follow you beyond this rage of poetry. Let others have the privacy of touching words and loss of love, and love of loss of love. For me, give me your hand.
Thank you, Heidi. And if we have another Heidi here, Heidi Rae. I'm not sure if I see her in the audience.
Hi, I'm Heidi Rae, and my husband is Tom Oleschuk.
Oh, okay, okay.
Did you sign it?
So I misunderstood the,
I signed up
no.
to my husband, Tom, who's a poet.
okay,
Okay.
okay. Wonderful, Tom.
Okay, so should I read next?
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, okay, all right. I'd like to read from Joseph Kumanyaka's latest book published last year. It's called Everyday Mojo Songs of Earth. And I want to just read the very first poem called A World of Daughters. And there's a reference towards the very end that I'll explain once we get there. Okay, A World of Daughters. Say, lick clean at birth. Say, weeping in the tall grass where this tantalizing song begins. Birds paused on a crooked branch over a grave of an unending trek into the valley of cooling waters. Lessons of earth, old questions unmoor the first tongue. Say I've gone back, says the oracle, counting seasons and centuries, undoing fault lines between one generation and next. As she twirls sackcloth edged with pollen, and one glimpses what one did not know. Say this is where the goat was asked to speak legends ago, to kneel and deliver a sacrifice. To feel a truth depends on how and why the singer's song fits into the mouth. Well, I believe the borrowed rib story is the other way round, entangled in decree, blessing, law, and myth. One only has to listen to night-long pleas of a mother who used all 1,000 chants and prayers of clay, red ochre, blown from the mouth upon the high stone wall, retracing a final land bridge to Wishbone. My own 2 daughters and granddaughter, the 3 know how to work praise and lament, ready to sprout wings of naked flight and labor. Yes, hinged into earth, we rose from Lucy to clan, from clan to tribe. And today we worship her sun-polished bones, remembering she is made of questions. No, mama is not always a first word before counting eggs in the cowbird's nest. It begins in memory. Now say her name. Say Dinknesh, mother of us all. Lucy is the name of the skeleton that was discovered in 1974 in Ethiopia. It's the earliest human skeleton, and she's also called Dinknesh, which in Amharic, the Ethiopian language, it means you are wonderful. So at so many different levels, you know, the poet is celebrating the greatness of this first ancestor and where this ancestor came from. So thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next reader is Rebecca Chapman. And we just need to ask you to unmute.
I think I'm unmuted now.
There you are, yes.
Reading a favorite poem by Langston Hughes, which was done in 1920. It's called Mother to Son. And I think bringing it up to date now, it could be not just a Black mother speaking to her son, but any mother speaking to a son. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor bare. But all the time I's been a climbing on and reaching landings and running corners, turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps 'cause you finds it kind of hard. Don't you fall now, for I's still going, honey. I's still climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stair.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Pippi Fortune.
I have to say, I think Rebecca has terrific taste because I had also chosen Mother to Son. But I have other poems by Langston Hughes, who I consider my first love. So I discovered him as a teenager. So the first one I have is The Negro Speaks of Rivers.
Oh, I love that.
I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. This next one is called Colored Child at Carnival. Where's the Jim Crow section on the merry-go-round, mister? 'Cause I want to ride. Down south where I come from, white and colored can't sit side by side. Down south on the train, there's a Jim Crow car. On the bus, we're put in the back. But there ain't no back to a merry-go-round. Where's the horse for kids that black? Kids that's black. Sorry. The next one is called Dream Variations. To fling my arms wide in some place in the sun, to whirl and to dance till the white day is done, then rest at cool evening beneath a tall tree while night comes on gently, dark like me. That is my dream. To fling my arms wide in the face of the sun, dance, whirl, whirl till the quick day is done, rest at pale evening, a tall, slim tree. Night coming tenderly, black like me. Almost finished. This one's called The Weary Blues. Droning a drowsy, syncopated tune, rocking back and forth to a mellow croon, I heard a Negro play down on Lenox Avenue the other night by the pale, dull pallor of old gaslight. He did a lazy sway, to the tune of those weary blues. With his ebony hands on each ivory key, he made that poor piano moan with melody. Oh, blues, swaying to and fro on his rickety stool, he played that sad, raggedy tune like a musical fool. Sweet blues, coming from a black man's soul. Oh, blues, in a deep song voice with a melancholy tone, I heard that Negro singing that old piano moan. Ain't got nobody in this world, ain't got nobody but myself. I'm going to quit my frowning and put my troubles on the shelf. Thump, thump, thump went his foot on the floor. He played a few more chords, then he sang some more. I got the weary blues and I can't be satisfied. Got the weary blues and can't be satisfied. I ain't got no mo, and I wish that I had died. And far from the night, I'm sorry, far into the night, he crooned that tune. The stars went out and so did the moon. The singer stopped playing and went to bed while the weary blues echoed through his head. He slept like a rock or a man that's dead. And, oops, give me the one of the, give me the stack, please. Thank you. This one's I too. I too sing America. I'm the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. And then the last one is called Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? That's it.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And our next reader, I think, is sitting right next to you. We have Philshayla.
Yay.
I'm going to read the last pages of the chapter called Democracy from the 1619 Project book. And this was authored, Nicole Hannah-Jones edited the book and created the idea of the book. And this was her chapter in the book. I can't read the whole thing, obviously, but I thought this part made a terrific point. But as the sociologist Glenn Bracey writes, out of the ashes of white degradation, we gave birth to ourselves. For as much as white people tried to pretend, Black people were not chattel. And so the process of seasoning, instead of erasing identity, served an opposite purpose. In the void, we forged a new culture, all our own. Today, our very manner of speaking recalls the Creole language that enslaved people innovated to communicate with both Africans who used various dialects and the English-speaking people who enslaved them. Our style of dress, the defining flair, stems from the desires of enslaved people, shorn of all individuality, to assert their own identity. Enslaved people would wear the hat in a jaunty manner, or knot a head scarf intricately. Today's avant-garde nature of Black hairstyles and fashion displays a vibrant reflection of enslaved people's determination to feel fully human through self-expression. The improvisational quality of Black art and music comes from a culture that ejected and rejected convention in order to cope with constant disruption. Black naming practices, so often impugned by mainstream society, are themselves an act of resistance. Our last names often derive from the white people who were once owned us. That is why the insistence of many Black Americans, particularly those most marginalized, to give our children names that we create, that are neither European nor are from Africa, a place we have never been, is an act of self-determination. When the world seems to quintessentially American music, when the world listens to quintessentially American music, it is our voice they hear. The sorrow songs we sang in the field to soothe our physical pain and find hope in a freedom we did not expect to know until we died became American gospel. Amid the devastating violence and poverty of the Mississippi Delta, we birthed jazz and the blues. And it was in the deeply impoverished and segregated neighborhoods where white Americans forced the descendants of the enslaved to live that teenagers too poor to buy instruments used old records to create a new music known as hip hop. Our speech and fashion and the drum of our music echo Africa, but are more than African. Out of our unique isolation, both from our native cultures and from white America, we forge this nation's most significant original culture. In turn, mainstream society has coveted our style, our slang, and our song, seeking to appropriate the one truly American culture as its own. As Langston Hughes wrote in 1926, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. For centuries, white Americans have been trying to solve the Negro problem. They have dedicated thousands of pages to this endeavor. It is common still to point to rates of Black poverty, out of wedlock births, crime, and college attendance, as if these conditions in a country built on racial caste and color systems are not utterly predictable. But crucially, you cannot view those statistics while ignoring another, that Black people were enslaved here longer than we have been free. As a woman in my 40s, I am part of the first generation of Black Americans in the history of the United States to be born into a society in which Black people had full rights of citizenship. Black people suffered under slavery for 250 years. We have been legally free for just 50. Yet in that briefest of times, briefest of spans, despite continuing to face rampant discrimination, and despite there never having been a genuine effort to redress the wrongs of slavery and the century of racial apartheid that followed, Black Americans have made astounding progress, not only for ourselves, but also for all Americans. What if America understood finally now at the dawn of its 5th century that we have never been the problem, but the solution? When I was a child, I must have been in 5th or 6th grade, a teacher gave our class an assignment intended to celebrate the diversity of the great American melting pot. She instructed each of us to write a short report on our ancestral land and then draw that nation's flag. As she turned to write the assignment on the board, the other Black girl in class locked eyes with me. We tried to claim, I'm sorry, I skipped a line. Slavery had erased my connection. We had to an African country. And even if we tried to claim the whole continent, there was no African flag. It was hard enough being one of 2 Black kids in the class, and this assignment would be just another reminder of the distance between the white kids and us. In the end, I walked over to the globe near my teacher's desk, picked a crayon up, picked a random African country, and claimed it as my own. I wish now that I could go back to the younger me and tell her people's ancestry started here, on these lands, and to boldly, proudly draw the stars and stripes of the American flag. We were told once by virtue of our bondage that we could never be American. but it was by virtue of our bondage that we became the most American of all.
Thank you so much, Phil. Are there any other people in the audience who need to read who weren't on my list? I think that was nearly it. If there's anyone else who would like to read, please send it to me in the chat. Catherine Soka, would you be willing to do our next reading?
Hey, I will. Okay, so listen, first of all, thanks to everybody who has read. The selection is remarkable, as it always is. I decided to read tonight from our dear friend Colson Whitehead. I can't see it here, but and I'll plug his new book, Harlem Shuffle, which I'm not reading from, but if you haven't read it, I do highly recommend it. This is from his novel Sag Harbor, and I thought it was a good touchstone to bring us back to where we are grounded here. The rock, the creek, the point. The increments of our existence, Earth, solar system, galaxy. The shallow waves of the creek put an end to the line of beach houses, and on the opposite bank, the wetland outskirts of East Hampton whispered in their eternal huddle. Watching over a scrabble of inhospitable beach, the wetlands curved up to Barcelona Neck, AKA the Point, and beyond that, maps failed. Even the animals changed, so extreme the border between Sag Harbor and the East Hampton. Crescent rinds of dried out sand sharks littered the shore, and this new breed of horseflies, the juvenile delinquents of their set, taunted and nipped the whole way to the point, trying to suck the moisture on your legs. The horsefly shuffle was the one dance I could do. No hassle, but at thighs and calves, skitter a few feet in a serpentine style and repeat. Also shout dag whenever a horsefly raised a welt. Who knew what kind of fauna lurked around the bend at Barcelona Neck? Peridactyls wearing ascots and sipping gin and tonics. Trust-funded duck-billed platypuses complaining about the help. It was all hoity-toity over there. When we were small, we were impatient for the day when we'd be able to undertake an expedition out to see the point. Sandwiches and baggies, orange soda, baleful glances backward after the soothing sight of our homes. By 1985, we knew it wasn't worth it and had decided the same was true of the entire beach, this beach being Havens Beach. This grousing about beach rights and intruders was beside the point because we never hung out down there anymore. The beach was for little kids and old people. We preferred the ocean on the other side of the island, especially now that we had access to a car. The ocean, in fact, was our destination that afternoon, once the guys finally showed up. So forget the beach and the rest of it, the quality of the sunrises and sunsets, although it must be said that those two things were top notch. Waking up early in that house was science fiction stuff. The sky over the wetlands was a fine, shimmering blue, slowly boiling up morning. Before you lay the dead, misty surface of the bay, imperturbable line of dark gray, a slab of ancient stone come out from under the earth. A reversal there. The sky was liquid, the water a solid screen. There were fewer boats then to zit the surface of the bay. No one to be seen at that hour, emboldening that cherished dread of early risers. that you were the only one you were the only being alive and awake in the world. Occasionally, some drowsily dipping seagull shot into the water after a low tide crab seized its quarry in its beak and swooped back up to the sky, dropping the bits of shell after it nuzzled out the meat, so that the dead pieces briefly rippled the water before all was silent again, a mute primordial theater. Sunsets unfolded above the big houses in North Haven. The sunset made it appear that the sun and the sky were not separate things, but different states of the same magnificent sky. As if the sky were a weakened, diluted form of the sun, the blue and the white merely drained away elements of the swirling red and orange disk sitting on the horizon. I'll wager on this. The sunsets closed the deal for that first generation, the ones who came here originally, my grandparents and their crew. After walking down through the woods off Hempstead Street, the meek trails that would one day be roads, it must have been wondrous to emerge on that unspoiled beach and see that sunset. No houses, no footprints even, just beach grass whispering to itself, saying, what? You'd have to spend some time to learn its language. That first generation asked, can we make it work? Will they allow us to have this? It doesn't matter what the world says, they answered each other. This place is ours. Over the years, I have learned that the sunrises and sunsets of that beach are rare and astonishing. But I did not know this then. Sunset meant that the damn gnats were coming out, and that was it. Colson Whitehead, thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Do we have any other readers? I think that might be it, except for myself. I have an Amanda Gorman poem, and it's from Call Us What We Carry. The title is In the Deep. We swam through the news like a ship bucking at sea. For a year, our television was a lighthouse, blinking, only in warning and never in warmth. We felt ourselves things bred in the night, hibernating from our own humanity. Grief made ropes of our arms. This whole time, what we craved most was only all that we have ever loved. The hours roved listless as a bike, drunk without its handles, until when, back to normal, we repeat an incantation to summon the before. We mourn the past more than we miss it. We revere the regular more than we remember it honestly. Don't we recognize all the ways normal can sputter and die? Yes, nostalgia has its purposes. Transport from the spectered, the jobs never coming back, the mother's primal screams, our children's minds shuddered from school, the funerals without families, weddings in waiting, the births in isolation. Let no one again have to begin, love, or end alone. The earth is a magic act. Each second, something beautiful on its stage vanishes. As if merely going home, we have no word for becoming a ghost or a memory. To be a member of this place is to remember its place, its longitude of longing. This elegy naturally is insufficient. Say it plain, call us who we left behind. It's not what was done that will haunt us, but what was withheld, what was kept out and kept away. The hand clenched tightly with every black blow. We cannot fathom all these phantoms. Do not fear our ghosts, learn from them. Slowly as the sea, we found the stubborn devotion to say, where we can, we shall hope. We found it in a million delicacies of enormity. An infant's full-chested chortle, July glassing our skin, music blurring a summered street, How, when we're among friends, our laughter can stomp up from nothing. Through this hole punched in the roof, we can see a stitch of sky. Our wounds, too, are our windows. Through them, we watch the world. We prayed for a miracle. What we got was a mirror. Watch, as without movement, we gather together. What have we understood? Nothing, everything. What are we doing? Listening. It took us losing ourselves to see we require no kingdom, but this kinship, it is the nightmare, never the dream that shocks us awake. And with that finished, Georgette is going to introduce our finale. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was just great. So I will have the pleasure of saying my poem by Maya Angelou, Still I Rise, and then I will pass it over to Noel. So I'm sure that we have all had the pleasure of hearing this poem before, Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? Because I walk like I got oil well, pumping in my living room, just like moons and like suns with that certain tide, just like hope springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lower eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my haughtiness offend you? Do you take it awful hard? Because I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air, I rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the hulk of history, shame, I rise. Up from the past that rooted in pain, I rise. I'm the black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind night sorrows of terror and fear, I rise. Into the daybreak that's wondrous and clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Thank you so much for tonight. I'd like to thank Jennifer so much for being here. I'd also like to thank you for being here, and Noel. Please look up their work. Thank the library, of course, for their partnership in doing this, and of course, Ms. Gloria Brown, and many of you that are here today. So good to see everyone. And now we're going to have our finale, author, reader, and local for being here. And you, if you missed our disco party this summer, you surely missed it. But now I want to introduce to you Noel Hankin. He is the founder of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, and it served as its vice president. And he is the author of After Dark, The Birth of the Disco Dance Party. Noel Hankin is the founder of the Best Friends Incorporated, a pioneer business enterprise that promoted discotheques in New York City starting in 1971. Their clubs paved the way for the Studio 54 Saturday Night Dance Fever, and it was a nationwide explosion of the disco in the late 70s. So, Noel, take it away.
Thanks very much, Georgette. Really appreciate you inviting me to be here, and thank you also for lining me up after Maya Angelou and Colson Whitehead and Langston Hughes. And how could I be the finale after them? I wrote this book as a COVID-19 project, After Dark, Birth of the Disco Dance Party. I'm going to read you a little excerpt from somewhere in the middle of the book. You'll have to buy the book to read the rest of it. This is chapter 7, and it's titled Dancers Couldn't Get Enough. After our night at La Martinique, before I read this, let me just mention that this is a true story, and it's a story that's never been told until now. After our night at La Martinique, that was a club, I called an emergency meeting of TBOF. That stands for the Best of Friends, a social club that I formed with 7 friends. We met at Danny's parents' house that weekend in their enclosed front porch. We had an idea that we knew the others in TBOF needed to hear. Andre took the lead. We have what could be an exciting opportunity in Midtown, he said. There is a captive growing audience of Black folks working in Midtown with nowhere to go after work. Next, Andre and I described the club itself. Compared to some of the venues where we had dances, La Martinique was in a more upscale neighborhood on 57th Street, 1 block from Carnegie Hall. The club was also a step up. It was old, but you could still feel the elegance it once had. Importantly, it was spacious, about as large as some of the ballrooms where we gave dances. Lastly, since Andre, CP, and I were the only ones who worked in Midtown, we explained that an increasing number of Black folks were working in various businesses in the area. I chimed in. We have a captive audience of young Black businessmen and women right in Midtown. They're already dressed up. Many could walk to La Martinique. They have money in their pockets, and we know they would enjoy this type of scene. CP chimed in. There's also plenty of free parking after 6 p.m. for those who drive in. But the most important revelation was how excited it was to dance to songs like James Brown's Mother Popcorn, The Temptations, I Can't Get Next to You, and Archie Bell and the Drells' Tighten Up right after work. We all agreed this was something special and a solid move for us to make. Tony and Danny volunteered to check out La Martinique to see if they could cut a deal for us there. As teachers, they would be off for the holiday season in a couple of weeks and could investigate La Martinique during that break. So a couple of weeks later, we met in my apartment in Left Rack City, which I rented right after joining Young and Rubicam. Tony and Danny reported that La Martinique was exactly as Andre and I had described it, and that it was available. But Tony went on to say, the room is a bit too large with a capacity of over 600. However, we found a smaller venue right around the corner called the Ginza, located at 40 East 58th Street, that is also impressive and about half the size of La Martinique. Located between Madison and Park Avenues, it was also a prestigious address. Tony explained that the area has high-end apartments, nice restaurants, and expensive retail stores. And because the Ginza has a capacity of only 300, it will be easier to fill than La Martinique. Therefore, it's less of a risk. Although we were all excited about the possibilities in Midtown, Tony was wise enough to push past his initial excitement and look at the opportunity through a logical business lens. He wanted to take advantage of the opportunity just like the rest of us, but he wanted to do it right, without growing pains. Looking back, I can appreciate Tony's conservative approach. I didn't see Tony's leadership qualities before, but it became clear to us during those discussions that he not only had good judgment, he was a natural leader. He was also very clever. Tony only found the Ginza because he noticed a newspaper ad promoting a social event for Jewish singles hosted by an organization called Saki Limited. Tony and Danny simply went to the address and discovered that the Ginza was a perfect venue for us. And Mr. Chu, the owner, was anxious to bring in a new crowd. The crowd that Saki Limited brought in didn't drink much, so the bar was not very profitable. A promoter named John Giuliano controlled Saki Limited. We found several suitable venues by simply following Giuliano's ads for the Jewish singles parties and discovered that they were all anxious to bring in a new crowd. The entrance to the Ginza was a simple door covered by a rounded black canopy with white lettering that spelled out the word Ginza. As you entered, there was a small foyer and a narrow staircase leading down one flight to a balcony level, overlooking the dance floor that was located one flight below that. The balcony ran around the entire room with a large bar in the back. It was a cage for go-go dancers and a DJ booth on the opposite side of the balcony from the bar. On the lower level was the dance floor, which was surrounded by cafe tables. There was also a buffet table on one side of the room that featured chow mein and chop suey, and on the other side of the room was from the dance floor was another bar. TBOF booked the Ginza and began planning our move to Midtown. We all agree that the event at the Ginza should be weekly to give folks who worked in Midtown a regular, predictable place to go. This decision proved to be wise. Danny indicated that the Ginza had sufficient air conditioning as well as an excellent sound system with 2 turntables, so our events would be turnkey. In fact, the Ginza had a DJ who would spin records for us. We forgot the DJ's name, but Danny and CP watched how he operated the 2 turntables, and after about a week or 2, they took over the role of DJ. It was a good fit. We all love music, but Danny and CP were particularly into the music. For them, it was personal. They loved to introduce the crowd to new tunes with a danceable beat. Music with an infectious beat was the key to keeping people on the dance floor, and the dancing was the key to getting people to come back. In the early 70s, the technology to create nonstop music existed, but it was hardly being used. That was about to change. The idea of using 2 turntables was not new to us. Andre and I had experienced discotheques in Montreal where they often had 2 turntables, but they simply played 1 record at a time without any effort to blend songs. As undergrads, we checked out Montreal because we heard they had a lot of discotheques. They did, and that they were inexpensive. They were. By the late 70s, Montreal was the 2nd biggest disco capital behind New York City. There were discotheques in Manhattan, like the Hippopotamus and Shepherd's at the Gotham Hotel. They catered to an older than us, white crowd. They didn't dance as much as our patrons did, and more importantly, the music they played was not the same as what Danny and CP played. Danny and CP drove the dancing experience by playing up-tempo R&B, funk, and soul with a heavy beat and mixed the records to provide high energy on the dance floor that would build to a fever pitch. They found a way to do this by making the most of the 2 turntables. The technique they used was slip cueing, where they would hold the record still at the start of a beat and release it at just the right time. So during the transition from one song to the next, dancers didn't miss a step. Occasionally, they used 2 turntables to extend the length of a particularly good song that was good for dancing. My DJ partners were so successful at using this technique at our clubs that we were, no doubt, instrumental in helping to usher in the 12-inch extended play single that became a staple of discos a few years later. When Danny and CP took over the DJ booth, the dance experience reached a higher level. The playlists they curated were very creative and focused more on dancing than the music the house DJ had been playing. Our crowd was very demanding and they wanted to be challenged. Danny and CP did just that. The experience my DJ partners created was a high-powered dance party that featured carefully curated, non-stop music. To us, these events were an extension of the live music dances that we gave. Our customers were dressed up in suits and ties, just like at our previous dances, and the admission prices were also similar. Danny and CP were so in tune with the music that they could build up to the intensity to reach a fever pitch several times during the night. The frenzy felt like dancers were climbing the walls. It was a completely different experience than other nightclubs that played only 1 record at a time. In those clubs, the music stopped and started often, but not so in our clubs. The relationship between DJ and dancer was fresh and inspired a higher level of interaction than was possible with live bands. When historians, well, I think we should stop right there. That's it. You got to buy the book to read the rest. After Dark, Birth of Disco Dance Party.
Thank you so much, Noel. It was wonderful to hear you.
Thank you.
Do we have time for Q&A for our featured authors at this time? I don't know if we still have time. Did we go over or? Are there questions for the work of our featured authors? Jennifer, I saw you pop on, then you popped out. Oh, she popped off. Oh no, she's there. I see her squares are moving around. And I know we had some of were there any questions for the featured authors? Oh, there's Jennifer, she's back. Some of their work did we build in time for that, Catherine?
If someone has a question, they can either raise their hand or put a note in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to give a short introduction, but of course we didn't do any of their work, especially Jennifer's, any, justice of their work, the many novels I'm sure that they have written and still working on. But, if you have any questions, please feel free. Or something they're working on currently, if you want to share with them, please, with the attendees, please feel free to. And of course, you can stop by Canio's bookstore to pick up their work. Okay, mum's the word.
You want to go eat dinner?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
well, thank you all again for joining us. Everyone who read beautifully, and thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add my thanks. We really appreciated it. Each year that we've had the African American Read, and now for the past 14 years, we've had a very wonderful, diverse selection of authors, some great American authors that we bring to people. Sometimes people haven't heard someone or haven't read a particular book. So if you heard something tonight that has sparked you to want to read more, first of all, we do of course have Noel and Jennifer's books at the store. The library is another great resource for getting books. And I dropped into the chat bookshop.org, which is an online ordering site that you can get the books at and also support the bookstore. So keep reading, and we thank you all for joining us this evening, and we look forward to being together again to celebrate great American writers. So great round of applause for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Morgan.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.